Donald J. Trump on Truth Social, and it's pretty long, has posted that he is endorsing in the Texas Senate runoff Ken Paxton. He called Ken a true MAGA warrior who has always delivered for Texas. It's not until paragraph 4 he brings up John Cornyn, where he says, he's a good man. I worked well with him, but he was not supportive of me when times were tough, which is pretty much Donald Trump's decision-making in a nutshell. Yeah. Support me or else.
Something extraordinary may have just happened inside Republican politics today. Donald Trump may not realize it yet, but according to growing panic inside Senate Republican circles, he may have just placed his own control of the United States Senate in serious jeopardy. One endorsement, Ken Paxton over Senator John Cornyn in Texas, has reportedly triggered shockwaves through Washington, with Republicans openly warning that Trump may have turned one of America's safest red states into a genuine political battlefield. Political power rarely collapses because of one enemy. More often, it weakens when loyalty starts replacing strategy and people stop making decisions designed to win. If his story shocks you, subscribe, stay engaged, and tell me honestly, has Trump just made the biggest mistake of his second term? The mood inside Republican politics changed almost instantly. Not quietly, not gradually, instantly. Because the moment Donald Trump formally endorsed Ken Paxton over longtime Texas Senator John Cornyn, Senate Republicans reportedly understood something dangerous had just happened. This was no longer only about loyalty. It was about survival. Texas is supposed to be safe Republican territory, a political fortress, the kind of state GOP strategists count automatically before election season even begins. But according to growing concern among Republican insiders, Trump may have just transformed that certainty into risk. And what makes this so extraordinary is the reason behind it. John Cornyn is not some anti-Trump rebel. Far from it. He voted with Trump overwhelmingly, defended much of Trump's agenda, even publicly aligned himself with Trump after moments of political hesitation. Yet, in Trump's political world, support is often not enough. Loyalty must be immediate, absolute, unquestioning. And according to many Republicans privately fuming behind closed doors, Cornyn's greatest political mistake may have been something surprisingly simple. He hesitated.
When he endorses, it has a tremendous impact. We're already doing really well, but certainly I have so much respect for the president and so appreciate his endorsement, and I think it creates a slight bit of momentum, don't you?
I think that will certainly have an impact, but we're not giving up the fight. I know who gets to choose our senators, and it's the people of Texas, and there's no substitute for that.
One of the oldest patterns in political leadership is this. Powerful movements begin weakening when personal loyalty starts outweighing strategic judgment. Lead, RS begin rewarding allegiance over electability, and eventually the coalition narrows faster than it expands. That concern is suddenly becoming very real in Texas, because Ken Paxton is not a universally popular Republican figure. He enters this race carrying years of controversy, corruption allegations, legal troubles, and deeply polarizing baggage. Exactly the kind of political profile that energizes hardcore supporters while alarming moderate voters. And here is the nightmare scenario reportedly keeping Senate Republicans awake today. Paxton may win the Republican primary only to become dramatically weaker in the general election. That possibility matters because Republicans are already defending an increasingly fragile Senate majority. Lose 1 or 2 seats, and Trump's ability to move judges, legislation, investigations, and appointments becomes infinitely harder. Lose the Senate entirely, everything changes. Committee control changes, judicial confirmations slow or stop, congressional investigations explode. And suddenly, a president who expected obedience finds himself fighting political trench warfare for 2 years. That is why reports from Capitol Hill describe Republican senators reacting with visible frustration, even anger after Trump's endorsement. Some reportedly viewed Cornyn as the safer candidate, the candidate who could simply hold Texas and move on. Instead, Trump appears to have chosen confrontation, chosen loyalty, chosen grievance. What often surprises political movements is how quickly dominance can become vulnerable. You can win primaries through ideological intensity, but general elections require something different: coalition discipline. Once fear replaces strategy, mistakes begin multiplying. And today, many Republicans appear increasingly worried that Donald Trump may have just made one of the largest strategic gambles of his political career. For years, the idea of Democrats seriously threatening Republicans in Texas sounded almost absurd. Difficult? Yes. Competitive? Occasionally. But genuinely winnable? Most Republican strategists would have laughed at the suggestion. That confidence suddenly looks far less certain tonight, Bacow. SC. According to political analysts and increasingly anxious Republican insiders, Donald Trump may have unintentionally placed Texas, yes, Texas, into play. And if that sounds dramatic, consider what Senate Republicans reportedly fear most right now. Not the primary, the general election, because primaries and general elections are two completely different political worlds. In a Republican primary, intensity wins. The loudest voices dominate. Hardcore loyalty matters. But in a statewide general election, especially one watched nationally, the math changes. Suburban voters matter, independents matter, moderate conservatives matter, and candidates carrying heavy controversy suddenly become much harder to defend. Ken Paxton arrives carrying exactly that problem: legal controversies, ethics concerns, years of political baggage, allegations and investigations that Democrats would almost certainly turn into nonstop attack ads for months. And privately, according to reports from Capitol Hill, many Senate Republicans appear deeply uncomfortable with the idea of defending all of that in a race they were supposed to win comfortably. There is an old political rule strategists learn very quickly: never turn a safe seat into a battlefield. Once a party is forced to spend money defending territory it already controls, the ripple effects spread everywhere else on the map. That ripple effect may be exactly what terrifies Republicans tonight. Because if Texas suddenly becomes competitive, resources move, money moves, attention moves, political energy moves. Millie, ons that Republicans expected to spend elsewhere may now be redirected toward protecting a seat they never expected to worry about. And timing could not be worse. The Republican Senate majority is already narrow. North Carolina looks difficult. Other battleground states remain unpredictable, meaning one unexpected Senate loss can become politically catastrophic. But there is another layer to this story that may be even more revealing. Many Republican senators reportedly begged Trump to stay neutral or back Cornyn, not because they love Cornyn, not because they see him as exciting, but because they believed he gave them the highest probability of simply keeping the seat. Yet Trump reportedly moved in another direction. Why? Because in the Trump world, political memory matters. Who defended him? Who hesitated? Who stood fully loyal when pressure was highest? And according to many frustrated Republicans, personal loyalty may have outweighed long-term strategy. Political coalitions become unstable when leaders begin testing loyalty more aggressively than viability. Parties stop asking, "Can this person win?" and start asking, "Was this person loyal enough?" That shift can become very expensive. And suddenly, Republicans are confronting a question many never imagined asking. Did Donald Trump just make Texas harder to hold than ever before? What happens if Trump really loses the Senate? Here is the part many people inside Trump's movement reportedly do not want to discuss publicly, because this story is no longer just about Ken Paxton, or John Cornyn, or EV in Texas. It is about power, real power. The kind of power that determines whether a president governs freely or spends years politically trapped. Because if Republicans lose Senate control, Donald Trump's second-term agenda changes overnight, completely, and Washington knows it. Judicial confirmations suddenly slowed. Cabinet appointments, endless battles, investigations into Trump's family, finances, and business world, back on the table. Aggressively, the Senate is not simply another political trophy. It is institutional protection. and many Republicans reportedly fear Trump may have just weakened his own shield. That fear explains why reactions from Senate Republicans reportedly ranged from frustration to outright disbelief after the Paxton endorsement became official. Some were described as stunned. Others are privately furious, not because they suddenly admire John Cornyn, but because many viewed him as predictable, safe, electable, the kind of candidate who quietly wins and allows everyone to move on. Instead, Republicans may now face months of expensive political warfare in a state that was never supposed to become competitive in the first place. And Washington veterans understand something dangerous about political overreach. Sometimes victories in the short term create disasters later. One of the greatest strategic mistakes powerful leaders make is confusing personal satisfaction with political success. Punishing rivals can feel emotionally rewarding, but politics ultimately rewards coalition management, not emotional payback. And to many Republicans tonight, that may be exactly what this feels like. Retribution, not strategy. Because reports suggest many Republican leaders urged Trump privately to avoid escalating this race. Stay neutral, protect the seat. Think bigger than one grievance. Yet Trump reportedly chose differently, and if Texas truly becomes competitive, the consequences could spread far beyond one Senate race. Imagine the headlines next year. Republicans pouring millions into defending Texas. Democrats smelling opportunity. The national media turned one red state race into a referendum on Trump's political judgment. And perhaps most painfully for Trump allies, the possibility that Republicans lose Senate control because of a decision Trump himself made. That is the nightmare scenario quietly haunting parts of the Republican establishment tonight. Because for years, Trump's greatest political strength was his ability to bend the Republican Party around him. But what happens when that influence begins costing victories instead of creating them? What happens when loyalty tests become liabilities? What happens when fear starts replacing confidence? Political dominance rarely disappears all at once. More often, it begins with moments people initially dismiss one risky decision, one avoidable division, one election that suddenly becomes much closer than expected. And perhaps that is why nervousness is spreading so quickly tonight. Because if Trump really has put Texas into play, he may not just be risking one Senate seat. He may, be risking control of the Senate itself. So tonight, the political shockwave moving through Washington is not really about Ken Paxton or John Cornyn anymore. It is about whether Donald Trump may have just weakened the very Republican majority he needs most. Maybe Texas stays red. Maybe Republicans will survive this fight. Or maybe tonight becomes the moment people look back on and say, that was when loyalty finally started costing Trump power. Tell me honestly, did Trump just make a brilliant MAGA move or a political mistake Republicans may regret for years? Like, subscribe, and stay with me because this story is moving much faster than Washington expected.